Good evening! Hi, everybody! Welcome to the Tyese event, Insecure, the Future of Working, part of the Beyond the Headlines series. As we gather for an exciting opportunity tonight to talk and learn from folks in our community, it's important for us to acknowledge that we gather on unceded Coast Salish territory belonging to the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. The reason it's important to speak this acknowledgement out loud, I'm sure a lot of you hear this acknowledgement quite often, the reason why we say it out loud is so that we are continually reminded that the lands on which we work, live, play, and gather are in fact unceded, which means they were never freely given. I would also like to recognize the tremendous labor that has gone into nurturing and protecting these traditional lands and the many ways in which Indigenous modes of gathering, organizing, and resisting inform the way that we do these things today. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited that you're here, and we're gonna have a nice time together tonight. My name is Jocelyn McDougall, and I am an event convener and organizer here in town, and it has been my utter pleasure to work with the Tyee in bringing tonight's event together and imagining how we could possibly present a conversation about the future of working and make it meaningful, but also digestible. So that's what we're trying to do, and you'll let us know how we do, I'm sure. I want to say a few words about the Tyee. Hands up right now, how many people read the Tyee online today? Okay. How many people read the Tyee online this week? Okay, great. How many people know what the Tyee is? Okay, great. So for those of you, those very few of you who did not put your hand up, I want to share with you the mission of this amazing organization. The Tyee strives to be a widely read and respected, independent online magazine that publishes news, reviews, and commentary not typically covered by BC and Canada's mainstream media. The Tyee aims to inform and enliven the democratic conversation. Yes, everybody, that's what we're here for tonight. The democratic conversation necessary to improve environmental, economic, and social conditions. So basically, it's where smart, curious people like you go to read journalism by smart, curious people. So great job, everybody. A little bit about the Beyond the Headlines series. So the name kind of speaks for itself, right? Beyond the Headlines. These events are about advancing the Tyee's mission to inform and enliven that democratic conversation. We're looking to bring the Tyee's journalism off the page and build community and inspire action through storytelling and conversation about issues that matter to you, like the future of working. Feels heavy, but actually it's awesome, and you're here to be awesome and have an awesome time with our awesome speakers. I promise I won't say awesome again. That's a lie, I probably will. All right. So we're trying to build community. So we're trying to get you to connect with one another in ways that maybe you don't often do. So you may have seen in advance of this event online, there was this poll. What does the future of work look like for you? Is it bleak? Is it awesome? There it is. And you had that in the room in advance. And I saw so many people were getting into it. So you're putting up your stickers of like, it's bleak, it's gonna be terrible, I feel super insecure, or like, it's gonna be great, I'm gonna be a freelancer and make all the money, it's gonna be great. And then we had a bunch of folks filling in the middle, like it's gonna be something else entirely. For example, more part-time work, longer years working. I think it's gonna be something else entirely. I think it's gonna be migration of jobs as per globalization and current shifts and chaotic governments. Okay, I mean, that's legit. And then I'm sure you saw there were a few stickers that just said, so many more robots. Like maybe we're just gonna have so many more robots in our lives. So in the spirit of building conversation, what I'd love to do right now, and I see that some of you are kind of spread out around the room, but I'd love to get you to talk to each other. I know, it's wild. So I'd love it if you could turn to someone who is near you that you did not come with or that you do not know. So that person might be sitting in the row in front of you or behind. Yes, you too, Janet Weber. Yeah, I heard you. Okay, all you people are like, I know this trick. No, I want you to do it too. So find someone you don't know, and we're just gonna take 2 quick minutes, talk to each other about why did you come here tonight? What is it that brought you to this conversation tonight? I'm gonna time you for 2 minutes, try to be equitable with your airtime. Find somebody, go. Why are you here? Why'd you come? All right, everybody. Okay, look at this amazing conversation that's happening. We're just gonna keep talking. So here's the thing. Now you need to come on back. Just come back to me. Come back, baby, come back. Here we are, coming back, and the energy is gorgeous. So good. Way to go, you guys. Okay, there's going to be more of that later, so that's awesome. Okay, connecting, chatting with each other is great. So the juices are flowing. Here we go. Tonight's event, Insecure, the Future of Working, is the third in the Beyond the Headlines event series. So the Tyee zeroed in on this subject matter very deliberately because their readers were responding with great interest to some of the stories that the Tyee has recently been publishing on this subject. And they're really not off base. I have to tell you, I've been working on this event for 4 months or so, and in that time, I have to have heard of at least 10 other conversations happening now or in the near future in Vancouver on this topic from a variety of different angles. So it is on people's minds, so way to go, Tyee. So when we started to put our heads together to think about how are we going to do this, how are we going to put together a conversation, a dialogue event where we try to handle this massive, unwieldy issue of the future of work in 2 hours and make it meaningful for folks and make it digestible for folks. So we quickly decided that the particular angle that would resonate for Tyee's readership would be the impact of evolving trends in the workforce on worker security, or insecurity, as the case may be. So when we realized that that's the angle we wanted to take, that led us to want to explore the question of who are we talking about when we talk about workers? And also, how can we or can we dismantle the dichotomy between today and or recent history, where workers are secure, and tomorrow, aka the future, where workers are insecure, understanding that currently and historically there have been many groups of workers who live with insecurity and precarity as a rule. So what we've tried to do for you tonight is curate a panel of voices that could speak to these questions from a really wide variety of angles. We've got an economist, a labor historian, an HR expert and advocate from the tech sector, a co-working entrepreneur and expert, and a seasonal and undocumented workers' rights activist. These are certainly not the only voices that could have been part of this conversation. But again, we want to make this meaningful and digestible, so that's where we stopped. When I say we, who am I talking about? This incredible, intrepid, generous group of big brains and hearts that volunteered their time, energy, creativity, and networks to bring tonight's event to you. I'm talking about our programming committee. And I want you to stand up. Okay, programming committee, if you're on the programming committee, you know who you are. Just stand up in the room so that we can see ya. We have Am Johal from SFU's Vancity Office of Community Engagement, Vanessa Geary from Vancity, Jen McRae from Urban Workers Project, Dr. Kendra Strauss from SFU's Labor Department, Janet Weber from SFU Public Square, Jeanette Adjison from the Tyee. We've also got Gordon Katic and Ambrosia Vertesi, who you'll hear lots more about later. And so, yeah, big hand for them. They put in a ton of time. And while I'm on the subject of thank yous, I'd love to share with you some of the other folks that helped us get this event together today. And so there's a bit of a long list of awesome people who helped out. So we'll hold the applause to the end, and believe me, I'll give you an opportunity to share all your love. We want to start by thanking our sponsors. So United Steelworkers, Vancity, and Community Savings. Without the contributions that they made to this event, it would not have been possible. So we're deeply grateful for that. We're grateful for having the amazing co-presenters with SFU's Vancity Office of Community Engagement. Fantastic to work with them and be here with them in their space. We had fantastic support from SFU Public Square. Their next community summit will be on this topic about the future of work. So please pay attention to their page, their social media, the things that they say and do about the things that they're going to say and do, because it'll be more about this kind of stuff. And our community sponsors who helped us get the word out about tonight, the Urban Workers Project, the BC Federation of Labor, and Changemakers Vancouver. Let's give them all a huge round of applause. Okay, what are we going to do tonight? So, in mere moments, I'm going to introduce you to our intrepid moderator for the evening. And Gordon, our moderator, will bring up in turn each one of our panelists and do a short introduction interview with each one of them. And then we'll move into the good stuff, the conversation, get them all talking to each other so that you can listen to their big brains be awesome. Again, I gotta find a new word. All right. So we're going to have a great conversation, and at Gordon's discretion, we're going to open the panel up to questions from the audience. So I want to just give you a quick word about the audience Q&A. I want to ask that you try to remember a couple of quick tips that'll make that part of the evening as effective and fantastic for everyone's experience. The first thing is brevity. So the thing about brevity, I always invite people to think about brevity as a show of respect. So when you are brief, anytime you have the microphone or you're making a comment or question, you are making room for other people to have time to also make a comment and question. So you are demonstrating that your voice is no more or no less important than anyone else's in the room. So I would ask you to think about using brevity as an offer of respect to the other folks in the room. Great, yes! Brevity. The other piece that I'd love to offer, that I like to share, is this whole question of leaning in or stepping back. So if you're the type of person, when you're in a room or in a conversation, that feels the urge to always be like, I have a question, I have something to say, I got an opinion, take an opportunity to try stepping back and see what other people's voices might bring forward. And I only say that because quite often what happens is a question that might be in our head might also be in someone else's head. So even if you don't have a chance to ask your question out loud, somebody else might bring it up. So give that a whirl. If you are the type of person who's more likely to sort of hang out in the sidelines, you want to think a lot about what you say before it comes out of your mouth so it can be perfectly formulated so that nothing weird or weird words fall all over around you. This is clearly not a practice that I use. If you're that type of person, why not take tonight as an opportunity to lean in and give us those thoughts hot off the presses. Just let them come right out of you and throw your hand up in the air and get in there. So our two things for the Q&A, brevity and lean in or step back. Gordon will remind you of this when the time is right. So after the Q&A, we're going to invite, we have two fantastic witnesses who are with us tonight specifically so that they can reflect back to us at the end of the evening what they heard and saw through the course of the night. And we have the fantastic, and if they could please wave, we have Diana Gibson and Irene Lansinger who are going to be sharing their thoughts with us at the end of our evening. Diana is from Policy Link Research and Consulting, and Irene is from the BC Federation of Labour. So we're very grateful to have their perspectives at the end of the evening. And after we wrap up, and if you don't have a chance to ask your questions, let's go to the bar and keep the conversation going. So the Charles Bar, which is literally like 7 steps across the quad if you enter or exit through the back door of the main floor, we're gonna head over there, we're gonna chitty chat, maybe have a bevy, and keep the conversation going, because I have a feeling that we're only gonna scratch the surface of what's really interesting and amazing with these fantastic speakers. They'll be there, the Tyee folks will be there, I'll be there. You might be real tired of me by then, but whatever, it's going to be a great time. And when we look past tonight, the Tyee will be reporting on this event in coming weeks. In about a week's time, we'll see a video of tonight's event, which you can then share with all your friends and be like, I was there in person. You missed it because you were in some stupid beach in the sunshine. That was dumb. Definitely share that when it comes. And speaking of sharing, we want you to obviously talk all about this on the social medias with the hashtag Future of Working. Now, let's get real. The reception in this room is really terrible. So please do use your data if you can and hashtag it out. If you can't, maybe write your tweets in little notes or something and send them out later. When you have a great little nugget that somebody says is genius, just write it in there and then send it after the fact. Or you could use Hootsuite, like Ambrosia was saying, to schedule those tweets for the next 7 days. Okay. Please use the hashtag and also Tyee's handle at the Tyee. Okay, that's it from me, you guys. I will be up a little bit later, but that's it for me for now. Without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you our fearless moderator. He is the producer and host of acclaimed podcast Cited out of UBC, the incomparable Gordon Katic.
Well, thank you so much, Jocelyn, for that too generous introduction. I don't have much to say except to bring up Henry Sue. Henry, why don't you come up? So you're an economist at UBC. Tell us just a little bit brief, what do you do at UBC? If that mic.
What do I do at UBC? I take naps, I guess. No,
Did you turn it on?
I did turn it on, yeah. Let's get the light on. So I do research on the effects of automation on the labor market, who recent automation is affecting the most, what's happening to these folks, and just the changing landscape of the workforce.
I'm going to jump in here because I feel like your mic's not working, even though it looks like it's on. Henry's mic's not working. Let's find you another one.
Oh, hold on. I got it. There you go. Now it's fixed. Sorry, that's
okay. There we go.
Great. So I think one of the things that we need to be mindful in the conversation, I mean, we're still really in the wake of the Great Recession to a certain extent. So just tell us a little bit about, how have we recovered from that recession?
I would say that, so the Great Recession is the recession that followed the financial crisis, 2007 through 2009. And what is true is that when the recession ended in the US, in Canada, and throughout the industrialized world, nation's income started to pick up, stock market valuations started to rise again. But what was certainly true was that jobs didn't bounce back in the way that we thought that they would, or in the way that societies are used to. And so one of the things that my co-author Nir Haimovich and I study is the fact that the reason why the job rebound was so soft and so weak following this recession, following the recession that happened in the early 2000s and in the early 1990s, is because there's a new dynamic going on, and that's the fact that since the 1980s we've had kind of a burst in automation technology, and so whereas in the past jobs that were lost during a recession would come back, what's going on nowadays is that jobs that are lost in a recession are no longer brought back because that work has been done either by has been replaced with either industrial robotics or the personal computer, in essence.
So one of the concepts that you've identified is this idea of kind of job polarization, that there are certain kinds of jobs after this recession and previous to, that haven't recovered in the same way. So what is that concept, job polarization?
Yeah, so job polarization is the fact that if you were to take all the jobs in an economy, and if you were to rank them from the lowest paying jobs to the highest paying jobs, what Canada, the United States, the UK, essentially all Western industrialized economies, the phenomenon that's going on over the past 30 to 40 years is the fact that all of the job growth that we see in these economies is at the poles. So either they're very, very well-paying jobs, or they're very poor-paying jobs. And what's happening in these economies is that the middle is getting hollowed out. So all of the job growth is polarized. It's happening at the top end, at the bottom end, and when we think about these loss of middle-paying jobs, this loss of middle-class jobs, the primary factor behind it is advances in automation, both in terms of industrial robotics and computing technology in the form of information technology and communications technology. So there's two broad categories of these middle-class jobs that our economies are losing. The first is the production worker who literally works on the factory floor. If you were to think about what a auto manufacturing factory looks like, 100 years ago, it would have been a lot of, men putting things together. Now, more and more, it's a couple of people and many, many robots. So that's one arena in which we've seen the effects of automation, is the loss of these middle-class jobs. The other, which is equally important but less obvious or less visible, is the loss of white-collar jobs in office settings. And so what's replacing that work is the computer. So we no longer have bank tellers, we have ATMs. We no longer use travel agents, we use websites. And so there's a large loss of work that is, again, well-paying, typically middle-class jobs, secretarial, clerical, administrative support. Those are the kinds of occupations that you should think about as having been lost.
So there are some competing explanations that some people would want to put forward, like bad trade deals or that sort of thing. Like, how would you rate that next to automation in terms of the effect in job losses?
Yeah, I mean, so amongst research economists, it's not even close. It's about a factor of 10 to 1. So for every one job lost to globalization, or lost to China or Southeast Asia, 10 jobs are lost to automation. And again, let's be clear, automation is not simply about the loss of jobs, it's also about the growth of jobs, right. Just very, very different in nature.
Right, great. Well, thank you so much, Henry.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Next, we have Ambrosia. Ambrosia Vancity is a VP at Duo Security and longtime Hootsuite. person. Tell us a little bit more about, you've been in tech for a long time.
Yeah, I've been in tech. Is working, good, okay. In tech in BC for 10 years. So my most recent gig that I started a year ago is in Michigan. So talking about automation and the loss of jobs there is a pretty daily occurrence of a feeling. But yeah, so I've been doing that, working with the HR tech groups. But actually my first job, I grew up in Campbell River, was in a fish plant in an assembly line. So I have this very unique perspective as an HR practitioner, someone who's been in tech for a long time, but also somebody that started in the world that Henry was just talking about is disappearing.
So tell us a little bit more about the world. You were saying a little bit earlier in the green room about people in Campbell River and where they've been moving to.
Yeah, so when I graduated in the year 2000, a lot of folks were half staying because there was mining, fishing, logging. It was very common. A lot of people going out to Fort McMurray for oil, whatever it was, not maybe necessarily going on to secondary education in any way. And then there were people that were leaving to further pursue something else. And I recently went back and spoke at a high school, and it's an exodus. It's an absolute, there is nothing here, everything's shut down, and a lot of fear. Or a lot of excitement about going to the city. Sometimes I, speak with people, and islanders don't want to leave the island. So that's a concern too, is just this geographic displacement away from their families as well.
But a lot of enthusiasm within your industry. Can you paint us a little bit of a picture of the kind of most young, ambitious, plugged-in, driven tech worker that you know, and what they tend to be like?
Yeah, so we had a phone call about this where I said, perhaps the role I play on this panel for you guys is the lens at which I live in on a daily basis is in and out of the, Silicon Valley, Bay Area on a monthly basis, meeting with highly millennial people that, they aren't just drinking the Kool-Aid, they're making it, right? And that's just a completely different level of being bought in to thinking that technology is only going to do good. That it isn't a double-edged sword. It isn't something that we have to think about all of the unintended consequences of various choices we make or bringing people with us. But they are like, they Airbnb their place, they Uber to work every day, they're on complete gig economies. They haven't been in a clothing store or a brick and mortar shop in 5 years because they order everything on Amazon. They live this world. They haven't been in a bank. Like, I don't think any of them would ever go in a bank. So when you think about, like, that exponential change in just daily consumer behavior or their life, everything's, from their perspective, very easy. They don't have to own cars. They can afford the more expensive apartments. So it's a very different value proposition for them than perhaps people that would be in different sectors.
And what happens when someone from a different generation with a different set of expectations of what work is like comes and wants to work with you and those young, plugged-in millennials?
It's kind of weird. I have people on my team that are 55, and I have people that are 20, and everything in between. And they're all in HR, which is, a crazy, rapidly evolving sector itself, or profession itself. What was expected of them prior is very different than now. And the people that are, have been in their career a long time, have this really good, experiential learning, or they can pattern recognize really quickly, don't want the, SaaS software tool, a tool for everything they do. They don't want to be slacked or pinged or whatever 24/7. They want the organization to protect their well-being and protect their way of operating and be respectful of that. The 20-something-year-olds are just like, Slack me all day, every night, I'm a global economy employee. And I'm like, don't do that. You are actually, that's harmful, that's self-harming. But it's a very different day-to-day, and managing a team with all of those people, some from tech, some not, that all want very different things from an employer and from their day and from their phones, is very, it's challenging as a leader, to be honest.
So I guess maybe last question, can you give us a bit of a prognostication in terms of these two work cultures? Like, how will they reconcile? Will we just stay on that, 24/7 work all the time, Slack me all the time, or is there some balance that you see forming?
I think that it's going to have to come to the middle. I see so much burnout so early in people's careers. And over the past 10 years, I see it earlier and earlier and earlier. I'm also a co-founder of something called HR Open Source, which is HR peer-to-peer learning community. We have about 3,000 practitioners in 52 countries. And no matter the sector, the experience is the same, feeling overwhelmed and under-resourced, but plugged in at any given moment, and feeling a sense of anxiety. How am I going to get ahead of all these progressive things? How am I going to get ahead of all these robots and automation and the fact that, the jobs don't match with the workforce skills? I think there's a lot in there that we talk about how are we going to move things back into a more balanced space right now, and help educate people and build programs, whether or not it's carrot or stick, on what I build. But maybe we can use technology to help us do that. So in my organization, for example, we had our engineers spend a week programming all of our communication tools so that they locked people out. They couldn't do anything. So when they went on vacation, the feedback in every HR survey I've ever seen in employee engagement surveys for the past 8 years has been, do you feel like you can take vacation? It's usually on the no side. Do you feel like you can unplug when you do? Yeah, and? When you come back, are you fully recharged? No. Because they feel overwhelmed by everything when they get back. And so we've been trying to build technology internally in our organization, or working with a lot of other organizations who are kind of the worst offenders, and building in things that kind of are forcing people back into the middle, because people won't slow themselves down early in their career because they just want to climb. And if that's what they think success looks like, and the organization is incenting that behavior, then I think we're in a lot of trouble.
Thank you so much, Ambrosia. Oh, Ambrosia, you can go to the panel. Ambrosia. Next up, we have Ashley Proctor. Ashley has been building collaborative communities since 2003. She's a leading voice in the co-working movement. And she also started the co-working health insurance plan, and is now running 312 Main, a new 100,000 square foot innovation center downtown Eastside. Thank you so much. So, just for a bit of context, right as we were walking into the theater, you told me you've never had a job.
No, that's true, actually. My adult career, I've always been either a contract worker, freelancer, or self-employed. I'm the founder of a few different companies and nonprofit organizations, and even in my current role, I'm working under contract.
So how did you find your way into the co-working movement?
It's an interesting story. I was a student at the Ontario College of Art and Design in Toronto, and we were experiencing a large renovation project called Superbuild. And through the process of this renovation, our entire projected 4 years of university was the experience of losing all of our common areas. So our exhibition space, our meeting spaces, our student paper office, the student union office even. And students would come to us and ask us if we could potentially create a space where they could gather and connect off campus. And so our first project was called X Space. It's a fully student-funded and student-run center collaborative workspace. And I got to see firsthand the type of connections that were being made in the space, and how productive people were being, and how happy they were working together in a collaborative space. All of these people were working for themselves, but they didn't want to work by themselves. And so X Space still exists today, 14 years later. And after that, I launched Creative Blueprint, our first co-working community in Toronto, which was focused for visual artists and creative professionals. And then Foundry co-working and events in Toronto as well, which is actually open to everyone. So there's quite an interesting mix of nonprofit organizations, people in the tech sector, artists, freelancers, entrepreneurs.
So paint us a little bit of a picture for people that don't know what a co-working space looks like. What would you see as you walked into one, and who would you see there?
So all co-working spaces are unique, first of all. But the one thing they do have in common is that it's supposed to be a collaborative workspace. And so we share the actual physical space. We may have an open desk in a large office, or we may have a small private office as part of a group of larger offices. What's common is that everyone comes to do a work on a different project. We're not part of one organization. Everyone is working either independently or from different organizations, but through the co-working space, we're sharing a kitchen, we're sharing meeting rooms, we're sharing printers and office equipment, and we have access to resources we couldn't afford on our own. We can all collectively afford a podcasting studio. We might all collectively be able to afford really nice furniture in one swanky boardroom. But on our own, that's not something that we're going to support.
And now you've been able to collectively afford extended health benefits. So tell us the story about how and why you built that program.
It's a passion project for me. COHIP is the Co-working Health Insurance Plan. While I was a student at the Ontario College of Art and Design, I got into a bicycle accident, and it was a pretty simple accident. I fell off my bike, but the injuries were pretty severe, and at the time I was covered by my student health and dental insurance. But the injuries were severe enough that I couldn't continue my program, and so I lost my student status, and in turn I lost my coverage when I needed it the most. And so very quickly I saw the domino effect and I experienced it firsthand. So I lost my scholarship, I lost my job, in turn I lost my apartment, my car, and really had to rely on the generosity of friends and family and social assistance to get back on my feet. But what made this process very drawn out, much longer than it really needed to be, was that I didn't have the health insurance that I needed. And so it became very obvious to me where that cycle could have been shortened. And so I went out searching for a health and dental plan that would be available to someone in my position as an independent artist or entrepreneur. And what was out there was pretty sad, and it wasn't affordable, and it wasn't very accessible. And so we started creating a plan right then. And rather than just extending it to the members of my co-working community, we decided to extend it to all of our competitors, so the other co-working spaces in our city and across our province. And we realized that our numbers were quite impactful. And so we decided just this past, about a year ago, to extend it across Canada. And so now COHIP is available to every independent worker, artist, entrepreneur, or freelancer in Canada.
So I guess the last question I have, the co-working movement calls itself a movement, right? And that's a powerful word. So what do you see as its ultimate aims as a movement?
So I think the core values of the movement really surround building community, strong ties between human beings, and collaboration. We do also value accessibility and openness and sustainability, but I feel like as a movement, co-working really sort of represents the same types of advocates for the issues that a traditional union would in a traditional employment position. And so we work together, making meaningful human connections, but through every unique co-working space, they each have a different mission and mandate. And so at 312 Main, for example, the focus of that space, because it is so important in the neighborhood in terms of that context, it's really community focused, and we're looking to support and encourage the groups that already exist in that community to elevate and empower them to do their best work through our space.
Thank you so much, Ashley.
Thanks.
Next up, we have Rod Mickelberg. He's a journalist and author, has been writing about labor for over 40 years, 23 of them at the Globe and Mail. Now is writing a history of the labor movement. Thanks so much for joining us, Rod.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, should be on. So the first question I have to ask you, I was looking at your blog, and you're at the BC Federation of Labor, a conference a few years ago, and you had a photo of the press gallery, and you happened to be the only person there. Where are all the labor reporters?
Well, I'm part of an extinct species, really. I tell people I'm so old I used to be a labor reporter, and because there aren't anymore. And it's a very sad commentary on the media business that newspapers, and not just newspapers, because there are even TV labor reporters, not many, but some, don't feel that that's a valuable beat to cover anymore. They just lump it into business, and they call it workplace. The Toronto Star actually now has, they've tried to revive it, but they don't dare call it a labor reporter. She's now, and she's actually very good, a work and wealth reporter, whatever that is. But I mean, she is quite good. You shouldn't judge her by what the beat that they give her. So Yeah, it's there was one labor reporter there, and in the old, I may talk a lot about the old days, being old. As I say, I'm so old, I can also remember when big labor really was big labor. And speaking of labor reporters, the Vancouver Sun didn't have one labor reporter. They actually had 2 labor reporters, if you can believe that. And we were on the front, both of us were on the front page all the time because labor was such a big part of the news in BC. And now, and when the BC Federation of Labor Convention came, we used to be in shifts, you know, and whatever the president, sorry, Irene, said that at the convention was on the front page, and because it was considered really big news. And those days are just gone.
So I have a question for hearing about the people that Ambrosia and Ashley are talking about. There doesn't seem to be a same kind of culture of labor organizing around those industries and those kinds of precarious jobs. Well, why do you think that is?
Well, I think people don't know, well, there are no labor reporters to tell people about what the labor movement's all about. And you know, Irene, of course, as head of the BC Federation of Labor and unions, the steelworkers and so on, they do a good job, but there's no one really in the mainstream media so much to tell their story. And young people, they grow up and unions aren't a big part of their life, and they don't know a lot about unions. And as I think about these amazing, almost, well, to me anyway, frightening changes that are happening, and, oh, we have to do this and we have to do that, and, oh, but isn't this great, and so on, and the forgotten aspect of it all is unions. I mean, stress, lack of protection, lack of benefits, these are all things that unions fought for over the years and basically achieved. Better working conditions, a solid life, and not having to have 19 jobs, you know, to try to scratch out a living and share an apartment with 4 people. And it's not easy for unions, but I don't think there's this consciousness of thinking, gee, I wonder if a union can help. And I also blame the unions for that too. They haven't had a hard time. They've had a hard time too adjusting to this unbelievably rapid pace of change. I mean, it's really quite overwhelming, and nobody really, in some ways, knows what to do about it.
Well, that person that Ambrosia is describing, you know, that's Airbnb-ing their place, working kind of in the gig economy, bouncing from job to job. I mean, how can unions reach out to that kind of person?
Well, I was thinking about that, and it's absolutely true. And I actually came across, there's still newspapers out there, and there's still newspaper reporters, although that's also, you talk about precarious employment. A newspaper reporter is, and I mourn that, and I know it's funny in a way, but it isn't funny. We're losing something. But I came across a piece by Dan Fumano on the gig economy, and he described kind of exactly the person that Ambrosia was talking about. These millennials who actually some of them, of course, want to work from home, want to set their hours. It's work when you want, make what you want, when you want, and also satisfy social needs in your other parts of life all in one day. It's no longer, I'm done at 5 and now I'm going to go for beers with my friends. It's, I wake up, go to yoga, then I have to sit a few dogs, clean up my place because an Airbnb guest is coming in, and then participate in a ride share. And this is a life for a lot of people, and I don't think a union can really. I mean, what can a union do about that? Form a dog. Sorry, yes, I can't even say it. A dog sitting union. But I think what unions can do is that they can forget about the old models of union certifications and so on. The workplaces are small, the employees are floating all over the place, is to kind of organize around issues and sign people up saying, okay, dog sitter, sign the union, and we'll charge you $5 a month or whatever, some small minimal fee, and we'll become part of a social movement around better wages, a bit more protection. Maybe we can get your employer to give you better benefits and that kind of thing without going down the road of certifications, which is the old way of organizing. And these days, it's almost impossible. I just want, go ahead.
Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say the labor legislation is still a big thing, and that's one of the problems with this new economy is that there's no real legislation and enforcement of standards or organizing or anything like that. It's a real free-for-all out there. And because, as somebody told me, the current organizing legislation we have and employment standards legislation we have is basically based on, white men working in factories. Well, that's not the case anymore. And Ontario, just yesterday, introduced this massive 400-page report, a total workplace review to modernize their legislation and to bring it up to, as much as possible to the current times. And things like protection for part-time workers, easier to get benefits, and all that kind of thing. And there's nothing like that in BC. And, I think what Ontario's doing is very, very interesting.
Well, thanks so much, Rod.
Thank you.
Well, next up we have Byron Cruz. Byron is from Guatemala. He arrived Canada about 20 years ago and now is an advocate, a tireless advocate for migrant workers, refugees, and an advocate to get them health care. So tell us a little bit, Byron, about the group that you started, Sanctuary Health, and who does that group serve?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and the TAIDA has always been interested in bringing to the surface the sufferings of the undocumented migrant workers and the agricultural migrant workers. The TAI has done a lot of investigation around it, and thank you for inviting me to be here. Actually, my wife told me to be here. She said, "Go, you should go. I don't want to go today." And she's great. She's part of the movement. And yeah, the topic of insecurity probably is new for many people, but it has been more than 500 years ago. The insecurity has been present for the First Nations. The insecurity has been present for the Black communities, for the indigenous communities of the Americas, but it's also more than 500 years ago of resistance and looking the path of the revolution to change that situation. And thank you. And many people ask about sanctuary health, and because of my pronunciation, sometimes they say, do you mean sanctuary? No sanctuary, sanctuary. Sanctuary. Are you a church? No, we are not a church, but we are a movement. And we started in 2012 to be an organization to fight back all the immigration laws by the conservative government, especially those regulations and laws about taking out the insurance for refugee claimants. They couldn't access health care. And slowly, Sanctuary Health became a network. And we started working with a lot of refugee claimants. We won the battles, the first battles in coordination with doctors in the national level, and the interim federal health for the refugee claimants was returned. They have that now. But slowly we started working with other populations that were not refugee claimants. Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of insecurity and precariousness like migrant workers face today?
When we talk about migrant workers, we are talking about approximately a little bit more than 50,000 agricultural migrant workers coming to Canada every year. And we are talking about a huge presence of Guatemalan, Mexicans, and we are talking about a huge vicious circle that starts in our countries that has to be with the corruption of the organizations who are in charge of the recruitment, the workers over there. There is a lot of money that the workers have to pay in order to be selected to come to Canada. And when they come to Canada, there's also another vicious circle in Canada. And I know that in the case of some sectors of the society, there's always the criticism that migrant workers are taking your jobs. That's not true. And then these workers end in a federal program that it's a minimum wage. People are getting minimum wage. and it's completely in conditions that 12 to 15 people living in a house and sharing one stove in many situations, sharing one washroom in other situations, many of them working different situations. So many of them working 15 hours, or some of them are working just 5 hours 2 days a week, and then they are not getting enough money to survive. And then we are seeing that in British Columbia we have around 10,000 agricultural workers or in similar industries following the BC Labor Federation number. It's around 10,000 workers, and there is not just issues in terms of housing. There is they come here, they work in the farms, and they have to pay rent, despite that they live in the farms, and they work there 15 hours. And then there's insecurity also in terms of for them there is no such as the rights that we can make use of, right? Migrant workers have to pay pension, and migrant workers have to pay an EI, and they don't see that. They don't see that. If the owner decides that they are not coming the next season, then there is like that money taken from them. They will never see that money. Then it's stolen money from them. And at the same time, we are seeing that in our case, we do a lot of work around health issues, and workers are continuously threatened not to see us. If they see us, the owner of the farm might put them in a special list, or in the past, the Mexican consulate put them in a special list, and they won't come back the next season.
Wow. So what are you seeing as the future trends? Is this growing? Are we seeing more and more migrant workers, or what are you projecting?
There is a slowdown in the numbers of temporary workers coming to Canada, but not in terms of the agricultural stream. The agricultural stream has seen an increase of migrant workers. Capitalism has created this system of exploitation of the labor force, and then there is an increase of agricultural migrant workers, and there is an increase also on the undocumented force. Labor force, we are working tireless in the organization of undocumented workers, and we have a network that is growing and growing, and we have a few victories in the last 2 years in terms of access to education for the kids that were not accepted in the school. We are still fighting back to some of the school districts. We want the possibility to register in the kids in New Westminster. We want the sanctuary schools in New Westminster recently, and also through the city level, we have the access without fear policy that is part of the struggle that we have been fighting for.
Thank you so much, Byron.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, we're making a small transition here, but just quickly, how rad are these folks here? We've got Henry, Ambrosia, Ashley, Rod, and Byron. Phenomenal. So right now, we want to give them a quick breather to get their heads together for this amazing conversation that's going to happen. So what I'm going to ask you to do is talk to each other again. Yes, wild, I know. This time, again, 2 times. You can find somebody new. It's going to be fun. What I want you to think about is, what questions might you want to ask these people? What are some of the things that just came up in those conversations, in those interviews, that you thought, oh my God, I want to know more about that? Or like, oh, that's my life. How can I figure this out? So turn to your neighbor and talk about what are the questions that you have at this point. Go ahead.
Would you guys ever consider using other than Obi-Wan? Oh, yeah.
precious pants about the panel. Hey everybody, can we try to actually make this a little bit more of a semicircle so that you guys can all see each other?
Yeah, we use all sorts. Yeah, we use
Your friend.
So you like flexibility too?
Can you move back just a little bit, Rod?
Can I have both your mics for a second?
It's all good. You can come up a little bit, Byron.
6 mics. Okay, is that one on?
That's for, yeah.
And is that one on?
This one.
Well, it's more okay. It's just muted up upstairs.
Okay, you ready, Freddie? I'm going to give you the 5.
Great.
Byron, you want some more water? You sure? Okay. I'm going to give you this one. Great job, everybody. Great job. You're just chatting away. It's so great. You take direction well. As it turns out, each time I ask you to talk to each other, you want to talk to each other more, which is the point. Great work, everybody. Okay, we're going to bring it on back. We're going to bring it back out of your amazing threads of dialogue and conversation and all of that beautiful energy and all of that focus and all of that interest and all of that energy. I'm seeing you two over there, sirs, you fine gentlemen on the side. You're going to bring your energy up here, and we're going to see who else. We have energy in the room, and we're going to bring it right to the front. Thank you so much, everybody. Okay, so here we are. We're diving into the conversation. How's everybody feeling right now? How's everybody feeling? Okay, that's like medium. So is that true, or are you feeling like good, but you're just not very loud? Like, how are you feeling? That's better. That's better. I love it. Okay, we're going to kick it off. Who's missing a microphone here? Byron has. Here we go. Gordon, it's to you.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. By the way, when we start this panel conversation, feel free at any point to just jump in and ask other panelists a question or cut me off, tell me my questions are dumb, I've phrased it wrong. I just want to make this as dynamic as possible. But the first one I have, again, is for Henry. And so many of the trends that we've talked about today, even co-working spaces have exploded post-recession. The gig economy, the sharing economy has exploded post-recession. I just want to pull it back a little bit. How much of what we're talking about is really just kind of a consequence of that, or is that a coincidence? Like, how much of a force do you think the Great Recession is in some of the trends that we're talking about?
I think that the Great Recession, gets a lot of our attention, but I think a lot of the forces that are underlying these changes in the workplace, those forces were there, and they're just playing out now. And so I think it's somewhat coincidence, yeah.
Ambrosia, another thing that you told me earlier was that you were at a conference where people were chanting, "Thank God for tech" at some point. Is that right?
I was literally at the conference when we were talking on the phone and had to step out. I was at a conference in San Francisco last week, and there was 3,000 people. And it kind of goes back to my comment about the Kool-Aid drinkers and makers. Right. And SaaS software is, we talked about exponential growth, like everything has a tipping point and then it's a stride. And I think that's software as a service, SaaS software, it's kind of that. And yes, people were, thank God for tech, with drinks and like a whole, I really should have videoed it and just played it right here. But our conversation that we were having was, how do you have a balanced dialogue? And I was like, well, right now I can't really hear what you're saying because I don't think I'm in a balanced environment. I think I'm in like in a world where these people truly feel like this is the next great thing for humanity.
What sort of tensions have you faced? Like, what's the perspective of people on the outside? Maybe if you could speak specifically about Hootsuite and your experiences there.
Yeah, I think when I started with Hootsuite, we were 20 people, and I supported the global growth to 1,200 people in 10 countries in 4 years. So there was no showering, but that's for sure. But I would say they started in the downtown east side, right across from Oppenheimer Park was the first office, and moved into Mount Pleasant. So that was a difficult transition, I think, for people, because they came in really being kind of seen as part of a gentrification movement. And at the same time, we had an office in San Francisco. And at the time, in the Bay Area, people were throwing things at Google cars who were transiting people in and out of the office because they were displacing people in the community. And so I think there is a friction point there in terms of the technology sector seeing itself as giving jobs and giving good paying jobs and bringing that to the community, and trying to do a lot of training and education and re-education at Hootsuite. When computer games, I was in that business before, and I was part of the growth and the downsize. We were re-educating people, coders, so that they did have a job to go to, and they weren't left out. So I think it's all very much so. There's a lot of different perspectives on that. I think having a conversation and having a dialogue, and organizations who integrate with the community do a much better job of that. I don't think they've perfected that conversation. But.
I wonder if, is this mic on? Yes. That tension in San Francisco, which received a lot of publicity, because, the people felt they were being moved out by the high-tech people who had good salaries and didn't seem to care a whit about them, and were moving into their neighborhoods, and they felt taking their jobs, and there was a real income gap and way of looking at society that they really felt was a real difference. Is that being resolved, or is that tension still there?
I think it depends on the community. For the Bay Area, I would say it's absolutely still there. I have friends in HR who don't work in tech, who are just like, those tech people are finding it there. That's their experience as well. I think in Austin, I was just there 2 weeks ago, some of the tech companies that are coming in, and they're coming in fast, and they're coming in like, we need 200,000 square feet so that we can hire 1,000 people in 5 months, and most of them aren't even going to be from here. And people are feeling that displacement. But I think in Austin, they've done a lot more work, both on the policy side, in doing retraining programs, and the companies themselves coming in and doing a lot more corporate social responsibility to try and not have that happen again. I think that moment in the Bay Area where people were getting in fights in bars, like it was attacking buses, attacking people. I think that was a moment where a lot of organizations probably took a step back and said, wait, are we doing this wrong? I don't know if all of them have put the right budgets towards fixing that problem yet, to be honest, but I think the awareness is there now.
Rod, where does this story fit into the labor history? Like, I'm trying to get a sense of why places like Hootsuite aren't more unionized.
Well, one of the things that, I'm not quite finished, but I'm almost finished, 150-year history of the BC labor movement, and it's really quite a history. And one of the things that I found interesting was, and I guess maybe I knew it but hadn't really thought about it, is that how much struggle and sacrifice workers had to make even the most incremental gains, and they could lose them 5 years later. It was just a tough fight until basically the end of the Second World War, when they finally got legislation that protected unions and gave them bargaining rights and compelled employers to have to recognize them, because all the strikes were for just union recognition. And this idea that somehow unions are big labor, or big, like an ulterior force in society, when you look at how they've struggled over the years and the sacrifices they've made to just get these small gains, it's really a stimulating story. But it's not a history that's really well known by people these days. They think unions are so, last century and so on. And yet really, what else is there collectively to protect workers' rights and to fight for better legislation? What Ambrosia's talking about in terms of that health benefit thing is fantastic. But I'm not sure how widely that can be applied. And What else? Yeah, I mean, unions still are a force within society, and I think they still have a part to play. But unions are going to have to change. There's no doubt about it. And it would be nice if people realized that that unions can still play a force in improving lives, improving security, improving working conditions. Maybe not even representing them, but just might fight that general issue. And there's a history of unions going to bat for people who aren't in their unions. In the fields of the Fraser Valley, unions have gone to bat for the seasonal farm workers and for the permanent farm workers, and on health and safety and that. And that's to represent people who are not in unions, but who are workers. And I think the union movement can still play a part in that. I will say one thing. Unions have, this is my prop, and maybe I'm taking too much time, but I have to get this prop out. Unions have fought against automation. They haven't fought against technology so much as the way it's transitioned. And there was a very big strike in 1966. The oil and chemical workers fought automation and the way it was being imposed on them, and the province came to the verge of a general strike. The whole province was going to shut down to to support the oil and chemical workers' fight against automation, because they realized this was an enormous issue for workers and they were going to face it more and more. At the last minute, the Premier, W.A.C. Bennett, intervened in the dispute because he didn't want the general strike, and the workers got a pretty good settlement out of it, much to their surprise. And the next day, the union movement took out this ad in the Vancouver Sun thanking everybody for supporting them. This is in 1966. And they said, our position was and remains to protect and advance the rights of working men and women. Foremost of all challenges facing blue and white collar workers is that of automation. And that was in 1966, 50 years ago. And of course, we're still facing it today, but without unions in the forefront of the struggle.
Ambrosia, maybe do you want to jump in there? Like, can unions play a role in, for instance, the place that you work, Duo Security?
At Hootsuite, actually, we had a unionized country when we went into Brazil. You have to join a union there. And we also had a subsidiary set up in France and Germany, which are very highly regulated employment environments with workforce councils and quite progressive rules around you're, as an employer or an employee, not allowed to touch your email after 6 p.m. There's huge penalties to the organizations for any kind of infringement upon people's personal time. And huge that's not a bad thing. Yeah. What's that? We get 5 weeks holiday to start. They get 5 weeks, some of them 6 weeks after 2 years. They have like almost a tenured system. If you're an employee over 2 years, it's quite difficult to exit an employee after that point. They get a tremendous amount of protection. So I would say Hootsuite experienced that out of our multiple countries. There was at least 4 that were extremely highly regulated, extremely employee-centric or employee protectionist. And so we did have to evolve our global practices around that, because you have to ensure that you're taking care of all of your global employees. So I would say that once we started going into those markets, that created a ripple effect into the BC side of the organization, where 85% of the workforce was, to make sure that the policies matched a lot closer to what some of those other countries who had unions or highly protected environments were, because our BC employees were like, no, that's not happening. Like, they get 6 weeks and I get 2. I don't think so. So we raised it up to 4 and then gave them a closed Christmas. Like, we did our best to try and give as much as we possibly could, but I think it was actually the other countries that created that. That wasn't a BC-centric thing. I would love to see BC use that as all these organizations become global economies and we'll have employees in all these different countries. I'd love to see them look at some of those practices and adopt some of those more, because I actually don't think, or I can say for a fact, it never hurt our bottom line after years.
So let's talk a little bit outside of the union and other ways to fight precariousness. Ashley, you mentioned that the co-working movement is filling some of these gaps. Can you tell us a little bit more about what are the the next initiative of the co-working movement? What's the next frontier of what you'll be doing?
We are seeing, oh, is this on? It says it is, but thank you. So we are seeing within co-working spaces and co-working communities, the independent workers are collaborating within the space, but we're also seeing within a city or a province or even a country, the co-working spaces are uniting together in the form of collectives or alliances. In Toronto, in BC, in Seattle, where my spaces are run, there's a strong and healthy collective in each city, which represents 50 approximately locations, and each one of those locations can represent up to 800 or 1,000 different independent workers. And so by putting those numbers together, we realize that we have strength in those numbers, but we're also responding to the needs of our members. That's the service we provide. And so the co-working health insurance plan is just one example. And we're seeing a lot of the champions of the movement working on these larger projects. For example, in the US, the Freelancers Union exists, and they're advocating for rights for independent workers, as the Urban Worker Project is here in Canada. Many of the co-working spaces are leading their own movements in their city relating to different regulations, province by province.
Byron, I'm wondering, as you listen to this, what lessons might agricultural workers and other migrant workers and other precarious workers that you work with, what lessons might they have for the kinds of people that Ashley works with in co-working spaces? What are some of the things that your community does to build solidarity and to build support?
For many years there was an investment in terms of human investment and economic investment of the unions in the Fraser Valley. They were 2 or 3 offices for the migrant workers, and that funding disappeared, and the last office was closed, I think last year in Abbotsford. Then we are still, I think one of the lessons that we have learned is that there is a lot of fear on the side of the migrant workers to be unionized, because that will mean the end of their contract. That will mean that they won't come back next year. Then we have been trying to create ways to work together, and we have found some ways to work, like in coordination with the BC Federation of Labor. We have presence in the Fraser Valley around health and safety training. We continuously do that. We have the next one in Abbotsford in a couple of weeks. And, but at the same time, knowing that there are fears in the community about unionizing, and with a lot of reasons. And there are different, for example, in the area of Delta, slowly the farms are firing South Asian workers and bringing Guatemalan workers. South Asian workers have been here for many years, and they know their rights. Now, the farms know that, and they are bringing actually Guatemalan workers, and who are also somehow fearful about unions, because after many years of civil war, the fear is still there. Then and then the farm owners don't know that. Then we have been creating other ways of organizing in the farms. We grew up in committees, and we have workers' committees in the farms. Not in all the farms, but in many farms. Then they are the ones who call us when someone is sick. Nurse Caroline is around in the audience, and we started going to the farms at night. We had to go to very dark places in order to see someone when these workers were sick, because we were not allowed to go to the farms. That's not the story anymore. After organizing in a small workers' committees, now we are invited to go inside the farm, and we are doing our work inside the farm. And it's happening in the last 3 years, and we are so happy that we grew up in that way. And we are probably, the workers are not ready yet to be unionized, give us time. Give us time. It will be the time to come. Yeah. And thank you. Sorry, last things. And some of the things I was talking to Jocelyn about sharing was also a couple years ago, also a new project came to be alive. And it is called BC Libre, like it's called BC Freedom, Bicycle Freedom. And then we saw the bicycle as a tool of liberation. And then we are working together with this UBC Students Project. And we are doing bicycle repair workshops in the farms. And together we are bringing bicycles to the farms. Then the workers are going out, getting to know people in the cities. They are doing their shopping, and they have the chance to go to workshops and to learn about other things and also to get out of the isolation that they have been for many years. And also there are other initiatives like the Umbrella Multicultural Clinic, that it's a mobile clinic. It's a self-sustained cooperative that has a mobile clinic that goes to Abbotsford, to Langley and to Ladner, and works with the migrant workers in the farms in order to secure access to primary care.
Let's go back to automation. So I'm wondering, we've talked a lot about automation so far. So far it's been a little bit abstract. So I wanted to ask you, Byron, like how is automation affecting the farm workers and the other kind of workers that you represent?
There was a farm in the Fraser Valley where the workers were afraid because there were new digital machines coming to do the work. Fortunately, it didn't work. The farmer spent lots of money on that, and the machine didn't work. And then that farm has 100 workers now, and the machine didn't work. But what has been introduced to the farms right now, it's other kind of devices, right? There is a farm where the workers have a GPS system attached to their arms. And this system works in that way that the manager knows exactly in which part of the line they are at. If they are behind, the manager knows about it. If they took more than 5 minutes in the washroom, they know about that. And there is a summary of that at the end of the day. And that is a problem because at the end of the season, they see the productivity of the worker. And if there is a worker that they are not happy with, this worker won't come back. And then in some cases it's a device attached to the arm. In other cases it's like in each line, like at the beginning of the door of the greenhouse, there is a computer that each worker has a code, and they have to mark when they come. And there is a lot of control. There are a lot of cameras in the greenhouses right now, and there is a farm. There is a farm in White Rock that also has new devices, but the treatment is so bad. Like last year, there was one of the Mexican workers that dropped a tomato, and the manager came and beat him up and says, "We are not paying you for dropping tomatoes." And then these guys are terrified. They don't denounce what's going on in the farms because they are afraid that they won't come back next year.
Wow. Henry, so we've talked about automation is happening, will happen. Some people have very dystopian visions for what that's going to look like. Other people have very utopian visions for what that's going to look like in the future. Can you maybe paint us both visions? Tell us a little bit like how it could go wrong and how it could go very right for workers.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that when we think about automation, we think about computing and digital technology. This is. The questions that we're talking about tonight, writ large, they're not new. Human economic history is about, finding ways to do things, to do work that people aren't very good at, or perhaps are, what human beings are not very good at. And so, if we were having this conversation, say, 100 years ago, the big automation story there would have been in North America would have been the advent of the moving assembly line in U.S. manufacturing, and what happened there was it replaced people doing a particular type of work, and it created a great deal of work for other individuals. So, back in 1910, the way that an automobile was made was it were teams of highly skilled men, 3 or 4 men, working together to build, a vehicle from the ground up, from piece by piece. And so, cars were therefore expensive to make because you had to have highly skilled individuals working on those to produce those vehicles. And what Henry Ford did was he created the assembly line so that, the work came to the men, and any one individual worker was not responsible for knowing how to put the whole car together, but just to put one piece on, and then, the work moved to the next person, and that person did additional work. And so what that type of technological innovation did was it created a great deal, it took jobs away from the highly skilled, and it created work for the low skilled. So, you think about the boom of, population and wealth in places like, southwestern Ontario and Michigan. What it did was it created work for, at that time, lowly immigrants, the Irish, the Polish, the Italians, and that, that era of technological change was a force that was, rather than widening inequality between the haves and the have-not, it was an era of technical change that shrank inequality. It's just so happens that the era of innovation that we're in now, in terms of advances in industrial robotics and computing and information technology, it just so happens that we are now in an era where inequality is rising. So, while, average, if you were to measure literally the average income amongst Canadians or amongst Americans, we're at all-time highs, but the truth of the matter is most of those gains are being accrued to the people at the very top. If you look at the middle household in a place like Canada or the US, those standards of living are essentially the same now as they were 30 or 40 years ago. And
so what kind of control can we take over these forces and the way that automation, and who reaps the benefits of it? Like, as policymakers, as workers, what can we actually do?
Well, yeah, so there are things that can be done kind of locally, insofar as, collectives organizing to, provide health insurance to each other. There are things that can be done at a slightly higher level through unionization and labor movements. But, I think the big thing that, we need to see is a societal recognition that, the gains to technology are not being shared equally, and so we need to have, governmental policy that is aimed towards spreading the wealth. So things that we've heard are, the idea of a universal basic income, but other things that have not been discussed as much, but could potentially help out would be, government subsidization of private employment. So, there, as we've said, the current, what automation is doing right now is it's affecting a specific segment of society disproportionately. These are middle-income individuals. And so if you think about, like I was saying, people working, production workers working on the factory line, who are those people? They're disproportionately men with low levels of education. If you think about automation replacing secretarial, administrative, clerical work, who are those people? Those are disproportionately women with middle levels of education. What we've seen over the past 30, 40 years is that in terms of women whose work has been displaced, women have done much better in terms of actually reaping the benefits of automation, because they have been enrolling in post-secondary education. They've been, upgrading their skills, and they've been able to move into the top-level occupations. It's the men who are kind of lagging behind. And so what you don't want, and it's something that is really being experienced in segments of American society now, is the fact that these men are kind of disengaging from productive work and productive lives. And so what you can imagine a government subsidy for employment doing is providing these people with job opportunities that they might not otherwise have, and therefore maintaining their work skills, improving their work skills, and then using that as a launching point to, you know, other work. So those are the kinds of things that we should be thinking about doing in terms of, you know, from a policy perspective.
So we've got just about a minute left, so I wanted to do a quick little game here, just like a rapid fire. So this is the future of working, and I wanted to get some prognostications from all of you on some basic questions. So one of the things that you brought up, Henry, is the universal basic income. So can you just, everyone down the panel, can you tell me in like 10, 15 seconds, do you think it'll happen? Do you think we should have a universal basic income in the next 10 or 15 years?
I think that it can happen. I think the question is, you know, the details that are important are at what level of generosity and how is it that you fund the universal basic income. And I think that the thing that we really need to think about outside of just kind of basic dollars and cents is, to what extent, you know, do we as human beings work simply to put food on the table, and how much of our personal identities are tied up in our having value as expressed through work. And if you were to introduce a too generous universal basic income, will that accidentally strip away that element of our humanness? I think that's an issue that needs to be thought about, you know, quite deeply, not just amongst our, you know, elected politicians, but this should be something that is, you know, as a society, we need to think about.
So rapid fire, I just want to go down the line. Ambrosia, UBI, where do you stand?
+1 on that. I think the conversations are happening now between associations and lots of different people. It's not just in the press or a lot of people having this dialogue. So I think the conversation's being had, the how, giving people enough to do something but not nothing, tough thing to figure out. I think it'll happen a lot sooner if we don't have better conversations between policymakers, education, and the workforce, because they're not bridging that gap of giving people the right skills. And that makes me more concerned about moving towards something like that without actually solving some of those, how are people going to define their value?
What do I mean for you, Ashley? UBI?
It's something that I think is a really interesting concept, and I'm all for it. But I also think I'm in a unique position being surrounded by thousands of people who are doing really meaningful work and doing what they love. And most people I know, it wouldn't change what they're working on at all. And our perspective and policy in our own contracts and the jobs that we create for other people, we're always putting people before profit. And so I think that's a concept we all agree with and understand pretty clearly.
Rod?
Henry is on? Okay. Henry's amazing. I agree with everything he says, +1 and +2. And Ontario, once again, is in the forefront here. They've just launched 3 pilot projects in Lindsay, Hamilton, and Thunder Bay, where they're going to experiment with exactly that, a guaranteed annual income. I think they're setting it at $17,000 a year just to see how it goes. The problem, and we can all kind of support that, like Ontario is really trying to grapple with these issues, unlike you-know-who. And the issues that Henry mentions are the key ones. Where do you set the level? And who is going to pay for it? The more people you take out of the workforce and who are not employed, the lower the taxation base. And these programs will be expensive. So, you know, it's an odd situation. And then, of course, the question we don't ever like to talk about, does it enforce idleness? And do people get kind of used to it? And if you set it too high, as Henry mentioned. But it is really an issue that now people are starting to talk about very, very seriously. Finland started a good old Finland, where my mother was born, and they're starting to experiments too. And one last thing, Switzerland, of course, they voted it down.
Byron, what about you?
What a hard question. I think my existence is not to improve the capitalism. And if this recipe is coming from capitalism, it's it's not going to be successful. I think before we had to get rid of the racist state and build a new society.
Well, I think I'll shut up now, and I think we're going to do Q&A for a few minutes here. So we've got roving mics. Jocelyn, do you have a mic?
I don't, but I will at some point. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is I'm going to take this mic right here. And my friend Anita is right here also, and she'll take another roving mic. If we have a second roving mic in the house, Anita will take it right over there. And I'm going to use this aisle, Anita's going to use that aisle. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 3 questions at a time and try to, and Gordon is going to keep track of them, and then we're going to smush them together and answer them in order to get as many voices as possible. So throw up your hands, and I'll do my side first, and Anita, you'll go second, okay?
And
Okay,
keep
3
questions short.
We've got
I will
leather jacket,
berate you
the
if you
gentleman
don't.
beside you, and this fine woman here. Question 1, brevity. Also lean in, step back, brevity.
So my first question is about gender. So there hasn't been a lot of conversations about women's work and women's patterns of employment. And traditionally, that's care work, which has often been left out of a protection under employment standards. So how, which also is not being, is not subject to the same level of automation that other, like, you can't make a robot do some of that work. So so what does the future work look like in that context? So the context of women's work.
The gentleman beside you. So women's work, what does the future of work look like there?
My question is to Byron. In terms of your migrant labor force working in the agricultural sector, is there an opportunity to work with landowners to get into a leasehold agreement where you can pay for a lease, or maybe a tax benefit situation where the landowner gets a tax break because their land is in the agricultural reserve and the tax breaks is worth it for them if it's farmed land? Is there a way of your members owning, getting into arrangement of ownership or leasehold or whatever, so that you can then create a situation where it's a cooperative and you have fair wages and fair working conditions?
Is there opportunities for cooperatives within the migrant workers in the agricultural sector? And question number 3.
I'm a millennial, and I gotta say, with my experience and many of my friends' experiences, I do not work where I want, when I want, and how I want. I work all the time, often multiple jobs, up to 4. It's not a nice experience, and it's not what I'm reading online, and it's not lazy, and it's not easy. So I'm wondering how, considering it's the future of working, how can millennials engage in their own future?
Bam! Go panel.
Okay, so I can speak on the gender dimension in terms of.
Sorry, I'm just going to ask the panel to
Yeah.
also use brevity.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so in terms of the future of work and how automation is affecting men differently relative to women. So as I said, the type of occupations that automation is most harming are occupations where the variety of tasks that you do in the job are relatively narrow, and those tasks can be done by following a set of instructions. So, in economics we call this routine work. Now, what's not being displaced by automation, in fact, what's being aided by automation is kind of cognitive, brain work at the upper end, and kind of home health aid, personal care aid work at the lower end. And so those are things that, helping people in and out of the bathtub, helping them get dressed, that's something that robots aren't good at and probably won't be good at for a while. And so to the extent that those occupations tend to be worked by women, those are growth occupations looking forward in industrialized economies. And in terms of the cognitive occupations, which are also growing, so we're talking about coders, and we're talking about managers, and those sorts of occupations. What's really interesting that I've been studying is that the occupations that are growing the most are occupations which combine both brains, analytical skill, and social and interpersonal skills. And so what we've actually seen economies like Canada and the US, is that at the upper end, these gains are being disproportionately being reaped by highly educated women, because women societally tend to be the best at combining brains with the ability to communicate, the ability to empathize, and the ability to read nonverbal cues and that sort of thing.
Does someone want to tackle the millennial question real quick? Ashley or Ambrosia?
You were looking at me. Do you want to go first? Yeah, happy to speak to that. I think stereotypes are dangerous, and I think that saying millennials are lazy and this and that. There's actually a Time magazine cover that shows like 1965 and 2010 saying like the same thing about the generations. It's kind of broad strokes. A lot of millennials I know, they really take advantage of the gig economy, but a lot of them actually see it as, and anybody here who's been a contractor or a consultant, just a hustle all the time, being paid for 40% of the work that you do, having no protection or downside protection for you or your family, and feeling like you walk into the room being called a millennial and therefore told what you want, need, and should be doing. And so feeling like a lot of that weight and pain. And so I think there are a lot of positive intentions to try and meet what, employers try and meet what they think is the need. So things like open PTO policy. I work in the States right now, so if you want to talk about rights and time off and all of those things, there are no rules. Paid time off policy. So vacation, health, maternity, I'm not legally required to give anything, not a day. So, and not a paid day either. So if you think about millennials kind of coming into the workforce, it's a very different value proposition, but what employers are trying to do is go, well, you can have unlimited vacation. You can take whatever time you want. You can work whatever hours you want, because that's what you want as a millennial, right? And what the research is showing is that actually that's creating anxiety and stress. And the ambiguity is not helping, and people aren't taking unlimited vacation because that's not the reality of the situation. You can't walk up to your manager and say, I'm taking 7 months off, are you cool with that? So it's a lie. And so I think the millennials are getting they're getting burnt out because they feel the hustle and they feel the stigma, and they're being, people have positive intentions to try and craft things that they think are working, but it's just creating a lot more work. So I think they have the benefit of access. They have the benefit of access, with social media and all of these things, to maybe more information, but more isn't necessarily always better.
So Byron, do you think it's possible to work with landowners in some kind of lease agreement, like the gentleman was asking about?
Cooperative model. I think it's possible. I'm always positive about having conversations, and having conversations is always healthy. And we are ready to start conversations. We have chosen 4 farms where we think that conversations can happen. And one of the farms has an interesting model that it's not that the workers are organized in a cooperative, they are organized in a committee, but the owner of that farm is part of the committee as well. And then there is it's called the Fair Trade Committee, and that Fair Trade Committee, some of the benefits of the production, like some of the gains for the production, goes back to the villages where they are coming from. Then in this specific farm, there is certain level of happiness going on. There are a lot of other issues, but at least there is one step ahead. And then we are interested, I think in the next step where we are taking is in the area of isolation. Then what we are saying, well, we are telling some of the managers is a sad worker, a worker that is drinking because has not seen the family in 2 years. It's having a hard time. It's very sad. Then it's not convenient for the farm to have a sad worker. And then we are proposing a more recreational type of activities, and that's our next move. And in order to improve some communication between the workers and the managers or owners of the farms.
Do we have time, Jocelyn, for maybe one more? Oh, yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Ash.
I'd love to briefly address both the gender question and the millennial question. And so I don't have experience in the traditional workforce as a woman in a caregiver role, but I see the benefit that co-working and freelance work can have for women who are in a traditional caregiver role in terms of being parents or taking care of elders or family members. And the freelance and the supportive co-working community allows them to accommodate these needs as well. And so in a few of our co-working spaces, we have groups of moms who work freelance independent or work from home remotely from a larger company, and they come in after dropping their children off at school, and they can leave on lunch to spend time with them if they want to, or pick up a parent or do some errands, and also come back. And then they collectively take care of each other's children after school, take turns picking them up, and this is all through the network in the co-working space while they're getting work done. So I see this as empowering and allowing them to be more flexible and maintain both their work and life balance in a more healthy way. And in terms of the millennial question, your situation is so common to most people that actually walk into a co-working community, and they come in and recognize there are hundreds of other people here that are experiencing that very same thing. And by working together, we can solve a lot of those problems, because if you're looking for a certain type of work or something more steady, someone in this room has that contact for you. Someone could partner with you on a larger project that you wouldn't be able to take on your own. Someone can point you in the right direction or introduce you to someone, and that happens a lot every day in a co-working space. We call it accelerated serendipity. Those interesting connections that happen in a really meaningful way, and so people really benefit even within their first week of being in a community like that, sharing those resources, because everybody is really working to build each other up.
That's amazing.
Well, I need to take 3 questions. Great.
Sure, I teach. Hello, I can talk really loudly. I teach and consult on sustainable economy, and one of the things I haven't heard anybody talk about much is sharing the work that is available. And if you think about a sustainable economy as we bump up against carbon and resource constraints, we're not going to be able to crank up consumption, produce more stuff to produce more jobs, because it's just not going to be possible. And I don't hear many people talking about this. But, you know, in places like the Netherlands, the government in the Netherlands and the financial sector have put everybody on a 4-day work week. You know, wow, I might be able to actually get out there and do my garden and do other things. Now, it means you've got to be paid decently to be able to afford, you know, your life. But how does that all fit in? I worry that we're going to create this economy where there's lots of people working a ton, and then there's a whole bunch of other people on universal basic income.
So the question about how do we design a work week that is balanced and reflects the difference in hours of work. Next question.
Yes, hi. My question is directed to Ambrosia. In terms of applicant tracking software, I'm in the midst of a job search, and spent.
Do you have a job?
My job is actually looking for work. It's actually a job and a half. But what I'm getting at is I saw a position that I had what I believed was an 80% match for. I spent a good amount of time customizing my cover letter and my resume for that particular position. Somebody told me about applicant tracking software website that I went to, put in my resume. It was a 38% match. I was shocked. Went back, reworded certain passages to match the tense, was able to bump it up to 51%, and still that was pretty low. So my question to you is being on the other side of the desk, looking at having applicants screened out and looking at a reduced list, what do you do to ensure that you're getting good quality candidates? Are you looking at only the top people that score 100% match? Are you looking at a range of applicants that are, so that's kind of what I'm trying to figure out.
A really important question about job seekers and applicant processes and the processes used by HR personnel. And we'll take our last question.
Yeah, this is actually quite related to the first question. If we all got into a time machine, went back to 1957, 60 years ago, the forecast of the future of work would be the big problem that we have to face is what are we going to do with all this leisure with everybody working the 20-hour work week? So there's kind of two questions that I have. One of them being, how come that is not a question that people are addressing here, the shorter work week? And the other question is, if the predictions from 60 years ago were so wrong, the projections, and those are projections of trends that were actually already happening, what kind of confidence can we put in projecting trends from the present into the future?
Good questions.
Great.
Okay, team, we've got about 7 minutes to answer all 3 of those questions. Hit it.
Great.
Okay,
So
on the question, that was one of my lines I forgot tonight, was that I'm also so old, I can remember when a fundamental question was, what are we going to do with all this leisure time? Because it's very real. And they've said, you want a job prospect for the future? Get into recreation or anything that would help people use up all this extra time they're going to be having, because they're going to be working 30, 35-hour weeks or 3-day weeks, the whole thing. And it's interesting, I actually saw the transition of newspapers. Again, I'm so old that I started out in typewriters, and then computers came in, and the Vancouver Sun was one of the first newspapers to introduce computer typesetting. And one of the things they used to sell it to us was that, oh no, it just goes right into the paper, so the deadlines, you can wait way later to get it into the paper, and the deadlines will be extended. Well, except what happened was the deadlines kept getting tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. It was exactly the opposite. Why? I could never figure it out. But it's often the exact opposite what people tell you. And why aren't we working shorter hours? Well, of course, a lot of people are through no choice of their own. But things have just got speeded up and speeded up and speeded up, and the stress and mental health toll is terrible, and we're tethered to our phones, and it's a very, very bizarre society. And the last thing people are thinking about is the mental health and how people feel about their work, and the quality of life. It's no longer, we used to talk about a work-life balance, it's now a work-life blend. I mean, the two are just blended so closely, and it's hard to be optimistic.
Do you want to maybe quickly, Henry, speak to that how confident we can be about projections and future trends, part of that question?
Well, yeah, I mean, so just quickly, I do want to address the idea that, why is it that, we aren't enjoying all this leisure time? Well, there are segments of society that are enjoying a lot of leisure time. They're not enjoying it because they don't have the income to enjoy it. And so this is a question of why is it that North American society has not moved in this direction, whereas other societies have. So Scandinavian societies have moved to mandated, 4-day weeks or, part-time work, and to some extent, Germany and France as well have moved in this direction. So, why do we not see this? We need to ask that of ourselves. Why, as a society, are we not valuing this to the extent that it becomes part of the national dialogue? In terms of the idea of, to what extent are future trends predictable by current trends? They're not. Nobody has a crystal ball. We're, all of us are just doing our best to guess what the future will look like given what things look like now. But, things can certainly pan out very, very differently. That's true in all spheres of life.
Ambrosia, what are you looking for when you're looking at applicants, and specifically about applicant job search software? What do you look at in there?
It's a really big question. I want to be respectful of our time because I just saw the 1-minute warning. I guess I would try and answer it in terms of, I think some automation software takes the humans out of things. And even though I work in tech and I am in an organization who sells, security to protect people from hackers, when it comes to recruiting, I think one of the challenges tech has is that it doesn't respect how long a candidate takes to put together a job application. And I think that they say they want diversity and they use pre-screening tools like that cut out people. And so I don't actually subscribe to them because I think that you miss people when you do that, personally. But I can talk to you after about how I could help you with that.
Well, thank you so much. Give a big round of applause to our entire panel, by the way.
Okay, everybody, we're almost home. I'm so excited to introduce to you right now our two witnesses who are going to reflect back to you. They've been wildly taking notes over the course of this, and they are going to share with you from their unique perspectives what they've heard tonight. And I've already let them know I'm going to be real stingy on the time. So let's hear first from Irene Lansinger from the BC Federation of Labour.
Well, I want to begin by thanking the panelists for a very rich conversation. Gordon, you did a marvelous job, and Jocelyn should be a teacher, all that energy. We've got to put that somewhere. So I really, really enjoyed the conversation, and I thought it was fabulous. The easiest way for me to do this was by panelists, so I apologize for kind of identifying you individually, but that's kind of the way I started and how I'm going to do it. So Henry talked about this polarization of jobs, low-paying jobs, high-paying jobs. And for me, that was a whole new frame for growing inequality. I thought this is why we have this growing inequality, because we have hollowed out the middle. And so we talk a lot about growing inequality, and it comes from this phenomena. But that has some impacts. And one of the impacts it has is on communities, because it is that group of middle people who are buying things at small business, who are building communities. And, you know, I talk to people in Prince George who've worked in a mill for 30 years, and they are the members of their community, and their kids are not getting those jobs anymore. So that really, really spoke to me in terms of a new frame for growing inequality and the death of communities and the kind of urban-rural split that we're seeing in BC at the moment. And I thought that was really kind of powerful new way to see it. But Henry also talked in the Universal Basic Income about the value of work to our personal dignity, and that's a theme that I think runs through the whole discussion. Ambrosia talked about people who are not only drinking the Kool-Aid, but making the Kool-Aid, and it occurred to me that while she was talking about this tech group and this gig economy, which is so foreign to me, that this is a fundamentalist religion. The tech, for those people, is a fundamentalist religion, and in fact has the same, what I would argue, is detrimental effects on some communities, and talked about that effect on the community when the tech, gurus come to a community and take those jobs. But she also talked about how workers want different things. They want different things from their day, from their employer, from their phone. And sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that most workers have that choice. And as someone in the audience so eloquently said, most workers don't have that choice. Some privileged workers have that choice, but most workers don't have that choice. And so we need to think about how we give workers choices about the kinds of jobs they had. Ashley is so different from me, I could not believe it. I have always had a job. It has always been a secure job because I'm a teacher, and I have almost always had a unionized job. I've been a union politician for many years, but so the contrast could not be greater with Ashley's description of what she did. But what really struck me about what she said was that the values of this co-working group are exactly the values that I've had as a teacher and that I've had as a union activist, that we're stronger together, that we need a collective, that we will only have health insurance if we put our resources together, and that the community that we form is so important, right? She talked about that community. And that forming that community allows us to do the work that we love, work that we would do even if there was a universal basic income. So, you know, these are values we share whatever form our work takes. And that really, Ashley's comments really brought that home to me. Rod talks in such a wonderful and amazing way about unions. I have some real disagreements with Rod. We've had a few arguments over the years, but I love the way he talks about the benefits unions have brought us, the wages, the benefits, the security, and the struggle and sacrifice that we went through as workers to get those things. And the power, again, Another theme, the power of the collective and sticking together to get those things. I disagree completely with him that we should give up traditional forms of organizing. Those are still valuable. UFCW 1518 just organized Canadian Tire in Prince George. And while we can still do those things, we should do them because they organize that pole. They have the ability, with the right rules and changes in government, to organize that pool of low-paying jobs and raise those wages up. But the point that Rod makes in saying that is also true that we need to expand the ways we organize. We need to consider these new ways of work in organizing. We need to organize workers in different ways too, as well as the traditional ways we have. And Unifor has a freelance workers union, right? So we are looking at those different ways of organizing. Byron reminded us so wonderfully of the 500 years of precarious work that have been there, and that there has been appalling exploitation of workers for a long time. This is not new. We are just doing this exploitation in different and more disturbing ways. Well, perhaps not more disturbing, but very disturbing ways. But one of the things I loved about Byron and the comments he made was this contrast between giving workers bicycles and teaching them how to fix those bicycles, which brought dignity to them and respect to them and freedom to leave their workplace and go other places and use their leisure time. And the contrast between that and the GPS that the employer is putting on them. You know, one that gives you respect and dignity and one thing that completely takes it away. But Byron talked, I think, very importantly about some other methods we should move. Movements for social justice, which he is part of, and we are delighted to support him in that work in the BC Fed. A movement for social justice, even revolution. I mean, these are things that we need to think about and are other methods of improving our lives and finding social justice. We need to use all of those tools, and those tools are centered around collective strength and the fight for vulnerable workers. And finally, because I have like 0 minutes, there are some consistent themes, and those themes are around the power of the collective, the fact that we're stronger together, that we need each other, and that whatever form work takes, there are some things we need. Decent wages, benefits, respect and dignity, and the right to choose and have some choices around our work. So I'll finish there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Irene. And finally, we have Diana Gibson, who will share her thoughts with us. Thank you, Diana.
Sure glad I wasn't asked to summarize tonight. What a great conversation. Irene's talked about sort of the energy of the collective. So my role is to wrap up with some of the solutions of what we could organize to get. It's really important to recognize right now that we're at a crossroads. Without redistribution, the benefits of automation are going to go to the privileged few, creating a dystopian future for the rest of us. So we need to organize, and we will need change. And I know that there was a lot of questions around how do we do that. So one comment I want to address was the comment about why haven't we talked enough about the reduced work week. And I want to remind folks that unions fought tooth and nail to get us down from 7 days to 5, and tooth and nail to get us down to 8 hours a day. So those battles aren't won without a fight. Unions have been under the gun and gutted. Our labor legislation, our organizing rights have been gutted over more than 10 years of right-wing governments. So we can't rely on the unions to be at the forefront of that with general strikes today. It has to be all of us. But we need to organize to build the future we want. And we'll have to fight for it. So I wanted to talk about 3 major pushbacks that I think is sort of thrusts for what we should be asking for the future we want. 1 is pushing back on precarious work. 2 is tax fairness. And 3 is a renewed social contract, so the social safety net. Work fairness. First, moving to push back on precarious work. We heard today that aside from a select elite of gig economy workers, precarious work is actually a policy choice, not a technological inevitability. It's not workers' choice. It's a policy choice, and it's racist and it's sexist. So we need to push back on it. And you know, I'm an academic, and I can tell you that it's not just about, we've talked about globalization a little bit, that there's more automation that's driving things in globalization, but as an academic, you know, over 80% of academics used to be tenured regular profs, and today barely any are. I have no security. I never know if I'm gonna get a course or not. I'm paid almost nothing for it. So this precarious work is actually just seeping into every sector. And it's about the gutting of our labor laws. And it's also an ideology. So it's about contracting out, privatization. We need to make sure we're right on our problem identification so that we can be right on our solutions. So on work fairness, we need to make sure we're looking at our employment standards and our labor laws to reclaim the ground we've lost and then to grow them to cover new forms of work. And there shouldn't be people in our backyard today that are scared to organize a union because they're being blacklisted. That is unacceptable. And it's not responsible for anyone in this room or anywhere else in Canada to leave that at the union's doorstep. That's on all of us. So tax fairness. As Rob said, how do we pay for it? There's lots of mechanisms. There's great polls right now saying that Canadians support higher taxes on corporations, higher taxes on the wealthy. Billionaires themselves in tech sector are saying today we're going to need a tax on automation. That's obvious. So there's lots of creative ways for us to pay for this. We need to close tax loopholes. We need to stop corporations from offshoring all of their money and not paying any taxes at all. Lots of ways to pay for this. We need to reinstate fairness. That was number 2. Number 3. This fairness, with this money, will be able to renew our social contract, that safety net. We know we're going to need, even if we have that pushback against precariousness, we will have workers in transition and non-traditional work that need programs. We've seen some great work in Alberta around the coal transition. I've been involved in some of that around what are we going to need to transition these coal workers into a new economy. So we've got lots to build on pension bridging, income security, incomes for mature workers going back to university. And we've talked about using the money from our increased taxes to support employment so that we can share the work with lower work weeks amongst a broader number of workers and a smaller number of jobs. There are lots of creative ways. If we actually get the revenues redistributed from tech into our public sector, we can use those to build the future we want. We can invest in an economy with quality jobs. We can have the government delivering public services rather than sending them to low-end contract work in the private sector. So it's a policy choice. It's a vision we can build. We need, like I said, 3 things. Push back against precarious work, get tax fairness, and renew our social contract for the social safety net. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so here we are. That was a packed 2 hours. My brain is full, and I imagine yours is also. I want to do some very quick thank yous. I want to thank, again, our programming committee. I want to thank the folks here at SFU that have had us in their house. I want to thank our volunteers who helped us get here from the front door. I want to thank SFU Goldcorp Center for the Arts staff. I want to thank Gordon, our moderator. And I want to thank our witnesses and our panelists. Can we have a huge round of applause? And finally, I want to thank you. I want to thank each one of you for showing up here tonight. And I made a glib remark earlier about the sunny beaches, but you know what? That's meaningful to a lot of folks, and you chose to spend your sunny evening with us here tonight having this really important conversation. So a huge round of applause for you for being with us. So we're wrapping it up, but keep your eyes peeled for the The video, whatever, digital, it's moving pictures on the screen. But most importantly, come have a drink. Come have a drink to the Charles Bar. Our panelists are going to be there. There's so many ideas flying around this stage. I know each one of you has ones you'd like to talk more about. So join us across the quad at the Charles Bar. Thank you to the Tyee for putting on conversations like this. They're unlike any other in the city. And support the Tyee with your money because they're writing the journalism you want to read. So thanks, everybody. See you at the bar.